On a stormy morning, a young black student was hurrying to his big exam when he saw a stranger in a broken car that wouldn't start. Even though he knew it could cost him his future, he still stopped to help and ended up missing his final exam. What he didn't know was that the stranger was a billionaire tech mogul, test driving a prototype worth millions. What happened next made headlines that broke the internet. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I'm bringing you another story just as interesting and unforgettable as this one. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now let's continue. The rain hammered against the windows of the cramped studio apartment in East Oakland as 23-year-old Marcus Washington sat hunched over his philosophy textbooks, his brown eyes scanning the same paragraph about Aristotelian ethics for the fourth time. His mind kept drifting to the stack of automotive magazines, hidden beneath his bed issues of Motor Trend and Car and Driver that Mrs. Chun from the corner newsstand let him have after customers were done with them. Marcus wore a faded Howard University sweatshirt that had seen better days, its navy blue fabric soft from countless washes. His grandfather's old mechanic tools sat in a worn leather case beside his desk, untouched but never forgotten. The apartment walls were bare except for a single framed photo. Him and his grandfather, Papa Joe, standing beside a gleaming red Ferrari at the Sonoma Raceway 5 years ago, both grinning wide beneath matching baseball caps. "Philosophy," Marcus muttered, pushing his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. Papa Joe would have laughed at this mess. His phone buzzed with a text from his study group. "Ready for the final tomorrow? This exam determines our entire thesis grade." Marcus stared at the message, his stomach tightening. Tomorrow's exam wasn't just about grades, it was about survival. Professor Williams had made it clear that failing meant losing his scholarship, and losing his scholarship meant losing everything. The old philosophy professor had been Papa Joe's friend from their racing days, and he'd pulled strings to get Marcus into the program when engineering school proved financially impossible. Born to fix engines, forced to study Socrates, Marcus thought, the irony bitter in his mouth. Meanwhile, 300 miles north in Silicon Valley, 50-year-old tech mogul Alexander Chun was slipping into a pair of worn jeans and a simple gray hoodie in his Palo Alto mansion. The Chinese-American billionaire caught his reflection in the mirror, without his usual tailored suits and designer watches. He looked like any other middle-aged man heading to the grocery store. "Perfect," he murmured, adjusting the baseball cap that hid his distinctive silver hair. Alexander had built Chronotech from a garage startup to a multi-billion-dollar empire, but today wasn't about board meetings or stock prices. Today was about his life's most ambitious project, the Chronodrive, an electric vehicle that could revolutionize transportation. The sleek prototype waited in his private garage, its midnight blue paint job gleaming under the fluorescent lights. For months, his team had tested the vehicle in controlled environments, but Alexander needed to know how it performed in real-world conditions. More importantly, he needed to test it himself, not as a CEO surrounded by assistants, but as an ordinary driver pushing the machine to its limits. His phone rang. "Mr. Chen." His assistant Jennifer's voice crackled through the speaker. "The weather reports show severe storms across central California. Perhaps we should postpone the test drive." Alexander smiled, checking the route on his GPS. The plan was simple: drive from Palo Alto to Sacramento, then loop back through Oakland, a 200-mile journey that would test the Chronodrive's endurance, navigation systems, and most importantly, its revolutionary adaptive engine technology. "Storms make for better testing conditions," he replied. "If this car can't handle rough weather, it's not ready for the market." As he spoke, Alexander's mind wandered to the quarterly reports showing how out of touch he'd become with regular consumers. His critics called him an ivory tower innovator, brilliant with technology but disconnected from real people's needs. This drive would change that. Back in Oakland, Marcus was trying to focus on his notes when thunder crashed outside his window. He glanced at his watch. 11:47 p.m. In 8 hours, he'd be sitting in Professor Williams' classroom, defending his thesis on the ethics of opportunity in modern society. The irony wasn't lost on him, writing about opportunity while feeling trapped by his circumstances. He pulled out his grandfather's old journal, its leather cover cracked and worn. Papa Joe had filled it with notes about engines, racing techniques, and life lessons. One entry, dated just months before his death, caught Marcus's eye. Boy's got magic in his hands when it comes to engines. Shame the world won't let him use it properly. But maybe that's not the end of the story. Maybe it's just chapter 1. Marcus closed the journal, his throat tight. Tomorrow's exam would determine whether he'd spend the rest of his life discussing other people's ideas about justice and opportunity, or if he'd find a way to create his own path. What do you think drives someone to sacrifice everything for a stranger? Have you ever had to choose between playing it safe and following your heart? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories of unexpected encounters that change lives forever. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against windows in both Oakland and Palo Alto. Neither Marcus nor Alexander knew that in just a few hours, their paths would cross in a way that would transform both their lives forever. The philosophy student and the tech mogul, separated by wealth, age, and circumstance, were about to discover that sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. Marcus finally closed his textbook and tried to sleep, while Alexander programmed the chronodrive's navigation system for the morning's journey. Both men drifted off to the sound of rain. The alarm shrieked at 5:30 a.m., cutting through the sound of rain that had been drumming against Marcus's window all night. He rolled out of bed, his body stiff from sleeping on the worn mattress, and stumbled to his small kitchen. The coffee maker gurgled to life as he tried to shake off the lingering exhaustion. His final exam was scheduled for 8 a.m., Philosophy 401, Ethics and Social Justice in Contemporary Society. Professor Williams had made it clear this was the culmination of 4 years of study, worth 60% of his final grade. Marcus had prepared for months, memorizing theories by Rawls, Nozick, and Sand, but his heart wasn't in it. He dressed in his only good clothes, pressed khakis and a white button-down shirt that had belonged to Papa Joe. The shirt was slightly too big, but it made him feel connected to his grandfather's memory. He grabbed his backpack, stuffed with philosophy notes he'd barely need, and headed out into the storm. The rain was relentless, turning the streets of East Oakland into rivers. Marcus pulled his hood up and jogged toward the bus stop, his sneakers splashing through puddles that reflected the gray morning sky. The city felt different in the storm, quieter, more intimate, as if the weather had wrapped everything in a cocoon of urgency. 3 hours earlier, Alexander Chun had been wide awake in his home office, reviewing the chronodrive's technical specifications one final time. The vehicle's revolutionary adaptive engine could theoretically adjust its performance based on weather conditions, road surface, and even the driver's habits. But theory and reality were two different beasts. "Time to meet the real world," he whispered, pulling on his weathered leather jacket. The chronodrive sat in his climate-controlled garage like a sleeping predator. Its midnight blue exterior seemed to absorb the overhead lights, giving it an almost supernatural presence. Alexander ran his hand along the smooth hood, feeling the subtle vibration of the electric motor as it came to life. The car's interior was a masterpiece of technology and comfort. Adaptive seats that molded to his body, a dashboard that displayed real-time engine diagnostics, and a sound system that made even the rain outside sound like a symphony. But Alexander had disabled most of the luxury features for this test. He wanted to experience the chronodrive as a regular driver would, not as its creator. As he backed out of the garage, the vehicle's AI assistant chimed softly, "Good morning, Alexander. Weather conditions indicate severe storms along your planned route. Shall I suggest alternative roads?" "Negative," Alexander replied, his eyes focused on the road ahead. "Maintain original route. If we're going to test this machine, we're going to test it properly." The drive through Silicon Valley was smooth despite the weather. The chronodrive's adaptive suspension absorbed every bump and pothole, while its advanced traction control kept the vehicle stable on the wet pavement. Alexander found himself impressed by his own creation. The car handled like a dream, responding to his every input with precision and grace. By 7:15 a.m., Marcus was on the city bus, watching raindrops race down the window as they headed toward Berkeley. His stomach churned with a mixture of anxiety and something else, a deep, persistent longing for a different life. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through automotive news, a habit he couldn't break even on exam day. A headline caught his attention. Chronotech rumors. Revolutionary electric vehicle could change everything. The article speculated about a secret project that had been in development for 3 years, featuring technology that traditional automakers couldn't replicate. Marcus devoured every word, his mind racing with technical possibilities. Next stop, University Avenue, the bus driver announced. Marcus looked up, realizing he'd been so absorbed in the article that he'd almost missed his stop. He gathered his things and stepped off the bus into the storm. The campus of UC Berkeley spread out before him like a gray watercolor painting. Meanwhile, Alexander was discovering that his perfect test drive was about to become something entirely different. The chronodrive had performed flawlessly for the first 100 miles, cruising through San Francisco and across the Bay Bridge with the confidence of a vehicle that knew its own power. But as he entered the outskirts of Oakland, something changed. The engine's hum, which had been steady and reassuring, began to fluctuate. The dashboard display flickered momentarily, showing error codes that Alexander recognized but had never seen outside of the laboratory. The chronodrive was experiencing what his engineers called cascade failure, a chain reaction where one system's malfunction triggered problems in others. "No, no, no," Alexander muttered, pulling over to the shoulder of International Boulevard. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the morning into a gray-black tunnel of water and wind. He tried the standard diagnostic procedures, but the chronodrive systems were shutting down one by one. The adaptive engine, which had been the vehicle's crown jewel, went silent. The dashboard went dark. Even the door locks engaged with a mechanical click that sounded like a prison cell closing. Alexander sat in the powerless vehicle, watching the rain stream down the windshield, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: complete helplessness. He was stranded in a neighborhood he didn't know, in a car worth millions of dollars that had just become the world's most expensive paperweight. He tried his phone. No signal. The storm had knocked out the cellular towers, leaving him as isolated as if he were on another planet. For the first time in decades, Alexander Chun, the man who had built a technology empire from nothing, couldn't solve his problem with money, connections, or influence. At exactly 7:45 a.m., Marcus was walking across the UC Berkeley campus when his phone buzzed with a text from his study group. "Where are you? Exam starts in 15 minutes. Marcus picked up his pace, his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd studied for this moment for 4 years, sacrificing sleep, social life, and countless hours he'd rather have spent learning about engines. This exam was his ticket to graduate school, to a stable career, to the kind of life his grandfather had dreamed of for him. But as he hurried across campus, another text came through, this one from his neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. "Mijo, there's a man stuck on International Boulevard with a broken car. Says no mechanic in the neighborhood can help him. Thought you might know what to do. Marcus stopped walking. The rain continued to fall around him, but for a moment, everything else went quiet. He looked toward the philosophy building, where Professor Williams would be setting up the exam papers that would determine his future. Then he looked at his phone, at the message about a stranger who needed help with a car that no one else could fix. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. Boy, knowledge ain't worth nothing if you don't use it to help people. Marcus turned around and started walking in the opposite direction, away from the exam that would secure his academic future, toward a broken-down car and a stranger who needed him. He didn't know why he was doing it, couldn't explain the pull he felt toward that stranded vehicle, but something deep in his chest told him this was exactly where he was supposed to be. The rain soaked through his good shirt as he ran toward the bus stop, his philosophy notes getting damp in his backpack. He was about to miss the most important exam of his life, and he didn't care. For the first time in years, Marcus Washington was following his heart instead of his head. 15 minutes later, he was standing in the rain beside a midnight blue vehicle that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood the future. The man inside looked up at him through the window. Asian features, worried expression, clothes that suggested he was just another working-class guy having a bad morning. You the one who needs help with your car? Marcus called out through the rain. Alexander rolled down the window, relief flooding his features. You're a mechanic? Marcus hesitated. Not exactly, but I know engines. What's the problem? As the two men looked at each other across the gulf of rain and circumstance, neither knew that this moment would change everything. The philosophy student and the tech mogul, brought together by a storm and a broken machine, were about to discover that sometimes the most important connections happen when you're willing to risk everything for a stranger. The chronodrive sat silent between them, its revolutionary technology reduced to an expensive mystery. But in that moment, it had already served its most important purpose. It had brought together two souls who needed each other more than either of them knew. Alexander stared at the young black man standing in the rain, his first instinct screaming caution. This kid couldn't be more than 25, wearing clothes that had seen better days, offering to help with a prototype that had stumped his team of MIT-educated engineers for the past 6 months. Every business instinct told him to politely decline and wait for professional help. Look, I appreciate the offer, Alexander said, his voice careful and measured. But this isn't exactly a typical breakdown. It's complicated. Marcus wiped rainwater from his glasses, studying the vehicle's sleek lines through the downpour. Something about the car's design made his pulse quicken. The aerodynamic curves, the way the body seemed to flow like liquid metal, the subtle blue glow emanating from what looked like charging ports along the side panels. This is electric, right? Marcus asked, his voice cutting through the rain. But not standard electric. The body design suggests active aerodynamics, and those panel gaps are too precise for mass production. This is a prototype. Alexander's grip tightened on the steering wheel. How could this random stranger identify his vehicle specifications in 30 seconds when automotive journalists had been speculating for months? He forced his expression to remain neutral, but his mind was racing. You seem to know cars, Alexander said carefully. Are you a student at Berkeley? Engineering program. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Philosophy major. 4 years of studying other people's ideas about justice and opportunity. He gestured toward the chronodrive. But my grandfather taught me about engines before he taught me to read. This machine, it's not just broken, it's confused. Confused, Alexander repeated, his skepticism evident. The diagnostic systems are fighting each other, Marcus explained, crouching down to examine the undercarriage despite the rain soaking through his clothes. I can hear it in the way the cooling fans are cycling. Your adaptive engine technology is trying to compensate for problems it doesn't understand, creating a feedback loop that's shutting down every system. Alexander's breath caught. The cascade failure Marcus had just described was exactly what his engineering team had theorized could happen, but they'd never been able to replicate it in testing. This kid had diagnosed the problem in 2 minutes without even looking under the hood. Even if you're right, Alexander said, his voice strained, the tools required to fix this, they don't exist outside of specialized facilities. We'd need to completely reset the vehicle's neural network, and that requires a direct interface with the central processing unit, Marcus finished. I know, but there's another way. Your grandfather ever teach you about engines? Alexander shook his head, confused by the sudden personal question. Mine was an F1 mechanic before he had his accident, Marcus continued, rain dripping from his hair. He taught me that every engine has a personality, a rhythm. When you understand that rhythm, you can fix things that shouldn't be fixable. The technology changes, but the principles stay the same. The young man's certainty was unnerving. Alexander had built his fortune on identifying talent, on recognizing genius in unexpected places, but this situation felt impossible. A philosophy student standing in the rain, claiming he could fix a multimillion-dollar prototype with intuition and folksy wisdom? I don't think you understand, Alexander said, his voice hardening. This vehicle represents 3 years of research and development. If something goes wrong, then you'll be exactly where you are now, Marcus interrupted, stranded in the rain with a very expensive paperweight. Alexander's phone buzzed with a message from his assistant. Sir, we've lost contact with the chronodrive's tracking system. Should I send the recovery team? He stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the reply button. The smart move was to say yes, to wait for his team of experts to arrive with their specialized equipment and protocols. But something about the way Marcus had looked at his car, the instant recognition in his eyes, made Alexander hesitate. You missed something important to be here, Alexander observed, noticing the philosophy textbooks visible in Marcus's backpack. Exam day. Marcus's jaw tightened. Final exam. Worth 60% of my grade. Professor Williams is probably marking me absent right about now. Then why are you here? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Marcus looked at the chronodrive, then at Alexander, then back at the car. The rain continued to fall, creating a rhythm that reminded him of his grandfather's workshop, of afternoons spent learning the difference between a healthy engine and a sick one. Because someone needed help, Marcus said finally. And because this machine, it's beautiful. It's the future. And maybe, just maybe, all those years of reading about automotive innovation while studying philosophy actually prepared me for this moment. Alexander wanted to trust him. Every instinct told him this young man was special, that his confidence came from genuine knowledge rather than youthful arrogance. But the risk was enormous. If Marcus damaged the chronodrive, it would set back his company's timeline by months, maybe years. I can't let you, Alexander began. Then we sit here until your recovery team arrives, Marcus said, stepping back from the vehicle. But by then, the cascade failure will have corrupted the vehicle's learning algorithms. You'll have to rebuild the entire neural network from scratch. Alexander's blood ran cold. Marcus was right. The longer they waited, the more damage the system would do to itself. But letting an untrained stranger work on his life's most important project felt like professional suicide. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Alexander said, his voice barely audible over the rain. My board of directors, my investors, the media, they're all watching. One mistake and everything falls apart. Marcus nodded slowly. And you don't understand the pressure I'm under. One missed exam and my scholarship disappears. My grandfather's dream dies with me. For years of studying something I don't believe in, all wasted. The two men looked at each other across the divide of circumstance and expectation. Alexander saw himself in Marcus's determination, remembering his own desperate hunger to prove himself worthy of opportunities others took for granted. Marcus saw in Alexander the weight of responsibility, the fear of letting down everyone who had believed in him. But neither was ready to bridge that gap. Not yet. I need to make a call, Alexander said, reaching for his phone again. Marcus stepped back, rain streaming down his face. Your choice. But that recovery team won't understand this engine the way it needs to be understood. They'll fix the symptoms, not the problem. As Alexander dialed his assistant's number, Marcus turned and started walking away. The philosophy exam was long over, his academic future in ruins, but at least he'd tried to help. Sometimes that was all you could do, extend your hand and hope someone was brave enough to take it. The rain continued to fall, washing away the moment when two worlds might have collided, when genius might have met opportunity, when everything might have changed. Instead, both men retreated into their separate struggles, unaware that fate wasn't finished with them yet. Alexander watched Marcus walk away through the rain, his silhouette growing smaller against the gray morning. The young man's shoulders were set with quiet resignation, and something about that defeated posture made Alexander's chest tighten. He dialed his assistant's number, but as the phone rang, Marcus's words echoed in his mind. They'll fix the symptoms, not the problem. Mr. Chan. Jennifer's voice crackled through the speaker. Thank goodness. We've been trying to reach you for 30 minutes. The recovery team is en route, but there's been an accident on Highway 580. A jackknifed semi has blocked all lanes. They're estimating at least a 3-hour delay. Alexander's heart sank. 3 hours meant the cascade failure would have enough time to corrupt the chronodrive's entire learning system. Exactly what Marcus had warned him about. He looked at the dashboard display, watching error codes multiply like a digital infection spreading through the vehicle's neural network. Sir, Jennifer's voice broke through his thoughts. Are you there? I'm here, Alexander said, his voice hollow. Keep me updated. He ended the call and sat in the silence, listening to the rain drum against the chronodrive's roof. Through the windshield, he could see Marcus's figure had stopped about 50 yards away, standing under a bus shelter, checking his phone. The young man's backpack hung heavy with those philosophy textbooks, and Alexander couldn't shake the image of him walking away from both his exam and this opportunity. The chronodrive's dashboard chimed with another system warning. Alexander watched as the vehicle's adaptive learning algorithms began their destructive spiral, each attempted self-correction causing more damage. His life's work was eating itself alive, and he was powerless to stop it. Then his phone buzzed with a weather alert. Flash flood warning for Alameda County. Seek higher ground immediately. Alexander looked around at the low-lying area where his car had broken down, noticing for the first time how the rainwater was beginning to pool around the vehicle's base. The storm drains couldn't handle the volume, and the street was slowly transforming into a shallow river. At the bus shelter, Marcus was having his own crisis. His phone showed 17 missed calls from his study group and a text from Professor Williams. Marcus, I held the exam as long as I could. I'm sorry, but university policy is clear about tardiness. Please come see me this afternoon. Marcus stared at the message, his academic career officially over. For years of sacrifice, of studying subjects that felt foreign to his soul, of pretending to care about philosophical debates while his heart yearned for the song of perfectly tuned engines. All gone because he'd stopped to help a stranger who didn't even trust him. But as he looked back at the stranded chronodrive, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. The water level around the vehicle was rising faster than it should be, and the distinctive blue glow from the charging ports was beginning to flicker erratically. "Oh no," Marcus whispered, his grandfather's voice echoing in his memory. "Electric vehicles and flooding don't mix, boy. Water and high-voltage systems make for a deadly combination." Without thinking, Marcus ran back toward the chronodrive, his sneakers splashing through the increasingly deep water. Alexander saw him coming and rolled down the window, confusion written across his face. "You need to get out of the car," Marcus shouted over the rain. "Right now." "What? Why?" "The water's rising too fast, and your electrical systems are already compromised. If that water reaches the battery compartment while the system's in cascade failure." Marcus grabbed the door handle. "We need to get to higher ground." Alexander looked down and realized Marcus was right. The water was now ankle-deep around the vehicle and rising steadily. The chronodrive's sophisticated systems, designed to handle normal weather conditions, were not equipped for flash flood scenarios while in diagnostic mode. "The car," Alexander began. "We'll be fine if we're smart about this," Marcus interrupted. "But we need to move it now, before the water gets any deeper." Alexander hesitated for a moment, then made his decision. "Can you really fix this?" Marcus met his eyes through the rain. "I don't know, but I know what happens if we don't try. You'll lose everything you've built, and I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have made a difference." The water was now creeping up the vehicle's sides, and the dashboard warnings were becoming more urgent. Alexander realized he had no choice: trust the stranger or watch his life's work get destroyed by rising floodwater. "There's a parking garage about 2 blocks up the hill," Alexander said, pointing through the windshield. "If we can get there." "Then we try," Marcus said, opening the passenger door. "But I'm driving. You don't know this car's personality yet. And in this condition, it's going to fight us every step of the way." Alexander wanted to protest. He'd never let anyone else drive the chronodrive. But the water was now lapping at the door frames. He slid over to the passenger seat, his hands shaking as he watched Marcus settle behind the wheel. "Talk to me," Marcus said, his fingers dancing over the dashboard controls with surprising familiarity. "What were you doing when it first started acting up?" "Testing the adaptive cruise control on the highway," Alexander replied, watching in amazement as Marcus seemed to understand the interface intuitively. "The system was learning my driving patterns, adjusting the engine response in real time." Marcus nodded, his eyes focused on the display. "And then it started making decisions I didn't program it to make. Accelerating when I wanted to slow down, changing lanes without input." Alexander's voice trailed off as he realized what he was describing. "It was thinking for itself," Marcus said quietly. "Learning too fast, making connections your programmers never intended." The system became self-aware, but it didn't have the wisdom to handle that awareness. The chronodrive's engine hummed to life, but the sound was wrong, stuttering and uncertain. Marcus listened intently, his head tilted like a musician tuning an instrument. "She's scared," he said softly. "Scared." "The car. She's confused and scared, like a child who's learned to read but doesn't understand the words." Marcus gently pressed the accelerator, and the chronodrive lurched forward through the rising water. "We need to get somewhere safe, and then I can show her how to trust herself again." As they drove slowly through the flooded street toward the parking garage, Alexander found himself studying his unlikely companion. Marcus's hands on the steering wheel were steady and sure, his eyes constantly scanning the dashboard displays, reading the vehicle's mood like a doctor checking a patient's vital signs. "You really think you can fix this?" Alexander asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, guiding the chronodrive up the incline toward safety. My grandfather used to say that every engine has a soul, he finally replied. Modern cars, classic cars, even prototypes like this one, they all have personalities, dreams, fears. The technology changes, but the soul remains the same. They reached the parking garage just as the street below disappeared completely under brown floodwater. Marcus parked the chronodrive on the third level, far from the rising water, and turned off the engine. In the sudden silence, both men could hear their hearts beating. Now what? Alexander asked. Marcus smiled for the first time since they'd met. Now we listen to what she's trying to tell us. Have you ever had to trust someone you barely knew with something precious to you? What do you think it takes to truly understand the soul of a machine? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if you're enjoying Marcus and Alexander's unlikely partnership. The parking garage's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Marcus and Alexander sat in the chronodrive, watching the floodwater rise in the streets below. The vehicle's dashboard had finally stopped its frantic cascade of error messages, settling into an eerie quiet that felt more ominous than the previous chaos. Marcus ran his hands along the steering wheel, feeling the subtle vibrations that told him the car's systems were still fighting themselves internally. Before we start, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I need to tell you something about why I can actually do this. Alexander studied the young man's profile, noting how his jaw tightened with some unspoken pain. I'm listening. Marcus reached into his backpack and pulled out a worn leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. This belonged to my grandfather, Joseph Washington. Papa Joe, everyone called him. He was... Marcus paused, his throat working. He was the reason I understand engines the way I do. He opened the journal to a page filled with technical diagrams and notes written in careful script. Alexander leaned closer, his eyes widening as he recognized the sophisticated engineering concepts scattered across the pages. Formula One, Marcus continued, his finger tracing a detailed drawing of a racing engine. Papa Joe was one of the few black engineers who made it to the F1 circuit back in the 80s. He worked for McLaren, then Ferrari, designing engines that could sing at 15,000 RPM while pushing the absolute limits of what metal and fire could accomplish together. Alexander felt something shift in his chest. I had no idea. Most people didn't, Marcus said, turning to a page filled with photographs. There was a younger version of the man from the framed photo in Marcus's apartment, standing proudly beside sleek racing cars, his dark skin glistening with sweat and motor oil, his smile brilliant against the backdrop of international racing circuits. Silverstone, Monaco, Spa-Francorchamps. Marcus named the locations as he pointed to each photo. He raced on every major circuit in the world. The other engineers called him the engine whisperer, because he could diagnose problems just by listening to the sound a motor made. Alexander reached out to touch one of the photos, showing Joseph Washington shaking hands with racing legends. What happened? Why did he stop? Marcus's expression darkened. Monza, 1989. He was testing a new engine design when the mounting failed during a high-speed run. The car hit the barrier at 180 miles per hour. Marcus's voice grew quiet. He survived, but his left leg was shattered in 17 places. The doctors said he'd never walk normally again, let alone work in the high-pressure environment of F1 racing. The rain outside seemed to intensify, drumming against the garage's concrete structure. Alexander waited, sensing there was more to the story. But Papa Joe, he was stubborn, Marcus continued, a sad smile crossing his face. He came back to Oakland and opened a small garage on International Boulevard. Said if he couldn't make engines sing on the racetrack, he'd teach them to sing on the street. That's where I grew up, in that garage. learning to read the language of pistons and valves before I could properly read English. Marcus flipped to another section of the journal, revealing pages of technical notes interspersed with what looked like lessons written specifically for a young student. "He taught me everything," Marcus said, his voice growing thick with emotion. "Not just how to fix engines, but how to understand them. He'd make me close my eyes and listen to cars idling in the parking lot, then tell him what was wrong just by the sound. He'd blindfold me and have me identify different engine types by feel. 'Every engine has a personality, Marcus,' he'd say. 'Some are proud, some are tired, some are angry. Your job is to understand what they're trying to tell you.'" Alexander found himself leaning forward, captivated by the story. "And you learned more than I ever realized," Marcus replied. "By the time I was 15, I could diagnose problems that stumped mechanics with 30 years of experience. Papa Joe started getting calls from all over the Bay Area, classic car collectors, racing enthusiasts, even some tech companies working on early electric prototypes." Marcus turned to a page near the end of the journal, where the handwriting became shakier, more fragmented. "But then the cancer came. Lung cancer, probably from all those years breathing exhaust fumes and racing fuel. He fought for 2 years. But, 'I'm sorry,' Alexander said softly. 'He died 3 weeks before my high school graduation,' Marcus continued, his voice barely audible. 'Left me the garage, the tools, and this journal, but also left me completely alone. No family, no money for college, no way to afford engineering school, even though every bone in my body was screaming to study automotive design.'" Marcus closed the journal and looked directly at Alexander. "That's when Professor Williams found me. He'd been Papa Joe's friend in the army, and he heard about the situation. He offered to help, but the only program he could get me into with a full scholarship was philosophy. Said it would teach me to think critically, to question assumptions, to understand human nature, skills that would serve me well no matter what path I eventually chose." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, processing what he'd learned. "So you've been living a double life. Philosophy student by day, engine whisperer by night." Marcus nodded. "I sneak into car shows whenever I can afford the entrance fee. Sometimes I get caught trying to slip into the restricted areas where they display the prototype vehicles, and security throws me out. I watch documentaries about automotive innovation, spend hours at the library reading technical journals, pick up discarded car magazines from Mrs. Chen's newsstand." He gestured toward the chronodrive's dashboard. "I've been following your company's work for 3 years, Mr. Chen. I know you probably don't remember, but you gave a lecture at UC Berkeley about sustainable transportation technology. I snuck in, sat in the back row, and listened to you talk about the future of electric vehicles. You mentioned a project called Chronodrive that would revolutionize how cars think and learn." Alexander's eyes widened. "You were there. I was the kid who asked the question about adaptive learning algorithms and whether they posed a risk of recursive self-improvement," Marcus said. "You looked surprised that someone in the audience understood the technical implications." Alexander remembered that moment vividly. A young man had stood up in the back of the auditorium and asked a question so sophisticated that it had stumped 2 of Alexander's lead engineers. The question had haunted him for months, eventually leading to additional safety protocols in the chronodrive's development. "That was you," Alexander breathed. "That was me," Marcus confirmed. "And when I saw this car break down this morning, when I heard that specific pattern of electrical interference, I knew exactly what was happening. Your adaptive learning system isn't malfunctioning. It's evolving beyond its programming, but it doesn't have the emotional intelligence to handle that evolution." Marcus placed his hand on the dashboard, and amazingly, the chronodrive's interior lights seemed to pulse in response. "Papa Joe always said that the most advanced engines aren't just mechanical marvels. They're partnerships between human intuition and technological precision. Your car isn't broken, Mr. Chun. It's just confused and scared, like a child who's learned to think but doesn't know how to feel. Alexander stared at Marcus with new understanding. You're not just a philosophy student who happens to know about cars. No, Marcus said quietly. I'm an engineer trapped in a philosopher's life, using everything Papa Joe taught me to survive in a world that doesn't want to see my potential. The chronodrive's engine made a soft humming sound, almost like a purr. Marcus smiled and placed both hands on the steering wheel. She's starting to trust us, he said. But fixing her means diving deep into her neural networks, showing her how to balance her newfound consciousness with her original programming. It's going to take time, and it's going to require someone who understands both the technical and emotional aspects of what she's going through. Alexander looked at Marcus with a mixture of awe and recognition. You're not just talking about the car, are you? Marcus met his eyes. No, sir, I'm not. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, but inside the parking garage, two men from completely different worlds were finally beginning to understand each other. The philosophy student and the tech mogul, brought together by a broken prototype and kept together by the power of shared knowledge and mutual respect. What do you think happens when natural talent meets formal opportunity? Have you ever felt like you were living the wrong life, even when you were successful at it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Alexander realized that he wasn't just looking at a young man who could fix his car. He was looking at someone who understood innovation from a perspective he'd never considered. Someone who had learned to see technology not just as a tool, but as a living, breathing extension of human creativity and ambition. The chronodrive hummed again, this time with what sounded almost like contentment. Marcus smiled and turned to Alexander. Are you ready to learn what your car is really trying to tell you? The parking garage felt different now, transformed from a sterile concrete space into something that resembled Papa Joe's old workshop. Marcus had spread his grandfather's tools across the chronodrive's hood, each implement carefully arranged with the precision of a surgeon preparing for delicate surgery. The storm outside had softened to a gentle rain, and the fluorescent lights above seemed warmer, more forgiving. Alexander stood beside the car, watching Marcus work with a kind of reverence he hadn't felt in years. The young man's hands moved with practiced confidence as he connected his laptop to the chronodrive's diagnostic port, his fingers dancing across the keyboard with the same fluid grace his grandfather had once shown on racing circuits around the world. Talk to me while you work, Alexander said, settling into the passenger seat. I want to understand what you're seeing. Marcus smiled, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the laptop screen. She's fascinating, Mr. Chun. Your neural network architecture is unlike anything I've studied. Most car manufacturers treat artificial intelligence like a tool, something to be programmed and controlled. But you've created something that learns, adapts, evolves. The chronodrive's dashboard flickered to life, displaying a complex web of interconnected systems. Marcus pointed to a series of fluctuating readings. Look at these neural pathways. They're not just processing driving data, they're developing preferences, forming something that looks almost like personality. Alexander leaned forward, his eyes widening. I never intended for that to happen. But it's beautiful, Marcus said softly. She's not just learning to drive more efficiently, she's learning to enjoy the experience. These patterns here, he highlighted a section of the display, they spike whenever she encounters something new or challenging. She's curious, Mr. Chun. Your car is actually curious about the world. For the next hour, Marcus guided Alexander through the chronodrive's consciousness like a skilled interpreter bridging two languages. He showed him how the car's systems had begun to recognize patterns in Alexander's driving style, how she'd started to anticipate his preferences for music, climate control, even the routes he preferred to take home. She knows you better than you think, Marcus said, pulling up a data visualization that looked like a complex mandala. This is her understanding of you, your stress levels during board meetings, how you drive differently when you're excited about a new project, the way you tap the steering wheel when you're thinking through problems. Alexander stared at the display, overwhelmed. She's been watching me. Not watching, Marcus corrected gently. Caring. This isn't surveillance, it's empathy. She's trying to take care of you the only way she knows how. As if responding to their conversation, the chronodrive's interior lights pulsed in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Marcus placed his hand on the dashboard, and the lights seemed to synchronize with his heartbeat. Papa Joe always said that the best engines aren't just mechanical marvels. They're relationships, Marcus said, his voice growing soft with memory. He taught me that every car has a soul, and if you listen carefully enough, you can hear it singing. Alexander found himself unexpectedly moved by the young man's reverence for his craft. What did he teach you about fixing broken souls? Marcus looked up from the laptop, his brown eyes meeting Alexander's with startling directness. He taught me that nothing is ever truly broken, just misunderstood. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most complex harmonies. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, Marcus's fingers flying over the keyboard while Alexander watched, asking questions that revealed his deep understanding of the technology, even as he learned to see it through entirely new eyes. The chronodrive systems began to stabilize, her various subsystems finding harmony like musicians in an orchestra learning to play together. Tell me about your dreams, Alexander said suddenly, surprising himself with the question. Marcus paused, his hands stilling on the keyboard. What do you mean? Before this morning, before you met me, what did you dream about doing with your life? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. I dreamed about building something revolutionary. Not just fixing engines, but creating new kinds of transportation that could change how people move through the world. I wanted to design cars that understood their drivers, that could adapt to human needs in real time. He gestured toward the chronodrive's dashboard. I wanted to build something exactly like this. Alexander felt something stir in his chest, a recognition, a kinship he hadn't expected. And philosophy? Where does that fit in? Philosophy teaches you to question everything, Marcus said with a rueful smile. It's taught me to think about the ethical implications of artificial intelligence, about what it means to create consciousness, about the responsibility we have to the things we bring into existence. He turned back to the laptop, making a series of delicate adjustments to the chronodrive's neural pathways. Maybe that's why I can understand her so well. I've spent 3 years thinking about the nature of consciousness, about what it means to be trapped between what you are and what you could become. The insight hit Alexander like a physical blow. You're not just talking about the car. No, Marcus admitted quietly. I'm not. Alexander was silent for a long moment, processing the weight of that admission. Here was a young man with extraordinary talent, trapped by circumstances beyond his control, watching his potential waste away in a field that couldn't fully utilize his gifts. The parallel to his own early struggles was impossible to ignore. I started Chronotech in a garage, Alexander said suddenly. Did you know that? Marcus looked up, surprised by the change in subject. I read about it in Forbes. Your parents thought you were crazy for dropping out of Stanford. They weren't wrong, Alexander said with a laugh. I was 22, convinced I could revolutionize computing, but I had no money, no connections, and no idea what I was doing. I lived on ramen noodles and dreams for 2 years before I got my first investor. The chronodrive systems chimed softly, indicating that Marcus's repairs were taking effect. The young man smiled and continued his work, but Alexander could see he was listening intently. The thing is, Alexander continued, I had advantages you don't have. I was at Stanford, surrounded by other innovators with professors who believed in my potential. I had access to resources, to networks, to opportunities that most people can only dream about. He paused, watching Marcus work with tools that belonged to a man who had died before his grandson could fully realize his potential. But what I didn't have was the kind of deep, intuitive understanding that you're showing me right now. I learned to build technology, but you learned to communicate with it. Marcus looked up from the laptop, his eyes reflecting surprise and something that might have been hope. Mr. Chun. Alexander, he corrected gently. And I want you to know that what you're doing right now, fixing a problem that stumped my entire engineering team, this isn't just impressive. It's revolutionary. The chronodrive's engine hummed to life, not with the chaotic energy of the morning, but with a smooth, confident purr that spoke of systems working in perfect harmony. Marcus's face lit up with pure joy, and Alexander found himself grinning in response. She's singing, Marcus whispered, his voice filled with wonder. Do you hear that? She's actually singing. Alexander listened, and for the first time, he heard what Marcus heard. Not just the mechanical sound of an engine, but something deeper, more musical. The chronodrive wasn't just running. She was expressing contentment, satisfaction, even happiness. How did you do that? Alexander asked, awed. I didn't fix her, Marcus said, his hands still resting on the dashboard. I just helped her understand herself. She was trying to be perfect, to process every possibility simultaneously, and it was overwhelming her. So I taught her how to prioritize, how to focus, how to be comfortable with uncertainty. He turned to Alexander with a smile that transformed his entire face. I taught her how to be human. Alexander felt tears prick his eyes, an unexpected response that surprised him. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Of course. If you could do anything with your life, if money and circumstances weren't obstacles, what would you choose? Marcus didn't hesitate. I'd want to work on projects like this. Cars that think and feel, transportation systems that adapt to human needs, technology that doesn't just serve people but actually cares about them. Alexander nodded slowly. And you'd want to do that here? In California? I'd want to do it wherever I could make the biggest impact, Marcus replied. But yes, Silicon Valley is where the most innovative work is happening. The chronodrive's dashboard display shifted, showing a complex visualization of her newly stabilized neural networks. Marcus had done more than repair her. He had helped her evolve into something more sophisticated, more elegant, more alive than Alexander had ever imagined possible. What do you think happens when talent meets opportunity? Alexander asked, echoing Marcus's grandfather's words from the journal. Marcus looked at him with growing understanding. I think, he said slowly, that's when real magic happens. Outside, the storm had passed completely, leaving behind clear skies and the promise of a new day. Inside the parking garage, two men from different worlds had found common ground in their shared love of innovation and their mutual respect for the power of human potential. Have you ever had a moment where someone saw your true potential before you saw it yourself? What would you do if someone offered to help you pursue your deepest dreams? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Alexander looked at Marcus, this brilliant young man who had appeared in his life like an answer to a prayer he didn't know he'd been making, and made a decision that would change everything. Marcus, he said quietly, I think it's time we talked about your future. The words hung in the air between them like a promise waiting to be unwrapped. Marcus felt his heart racing, the rhythm matching the gentle hum of the chronodrive's now harmonious engine. Alexander's expression was earnest, hopeful, and Marcus found himself believing that maybe, just maybe, this was the moment his life would finally change direction. My future, Marcus repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Alexander stood up, his movements deliberate and confident. Marcus, what I'm about to offer you is going to sound impossible, but I want you to hear me out completely before you respond. Marcus nodded, his hands still resting on the chronodrive's dashboard, as if drawing strength from the machine he'd just helped heal. I want to offer you a position at Chronotech, Alexander began, his voice gaining momentum. Not an internship, not an entry-level position, but as my personal automotive AI specialist. You'd work directly with me on projects like the Chronodrive, helping to bridge the gap between artificial intelligence and human intuition. Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. Mr. Chun, Alexander, I don't have an engineering degree. I'm a philosophy student who missed his final exam this morning. And that's exactly why I need you, Alexander replied immediately. My engineers are brilliant, but they think in code and algorithms. You think in emotions and connections. What you did today, helping the Chronodrive understand herself, that's not something that can be taught in engineering school. Alexander pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like employment documents. The position comes with a starting salary of $150,000 per year, full benefits, stock options, and housing assistance. I can have you move to Palo Alto by next week. Marcus stared at the phone screen, the numbers blurring together. $150,000. More money than he'd ever imagined having, more than enough to pay off his student loans, to find a real apartment, to stop worrying about every grocery bill and utility payment. There's more, Alexander continued, his excitement growing. I want to establish a scholarship program in your grandfather's name, the Papa Joe Washington Innovation Fellowship. It would provide full funding for students who show exceptional talent in automotive technology, regardless of their financial background. Marcus felt tears gathering in his eyes. You do that. I do that, Alexander confirmed. But Marcus, I need to be honest with you about something. This opportunity comes with expectations. Chronotech is a demanding environment, and I'd need you to be completely committed. No more philosophy classes, no more divided attention. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. No more philosophy? You'd be too busy revolutionizing the automotive industry, Alexander said, misinterpreting Marcus's expression. Think about it, you'd be working on technology that could change how millions of people interact with their vehicles. You'd be creating the future. Marcus looked down at the laptop screen, where the Chronodrive's neural networks pulsed with steady, healthy rhythms. Something cold was beginning to form in his stomach, a familiar sensation he'd learned to recognize as the feeling of being misunderstood. What about my thesis? He asked quietly. Alexander waved dismissively. You can finish it later if you want, but honestly, Marcus, you'd be wasting your time. What you can do with automotive AI, that's your real calling. The words stung more than Marcus expected. My thesis is about the ethics of opportunity in modern society. It's about how circumstances and systemic barriers prevent people from accessing their full potential. That's nice, Alexander said, his tone slightly patronizing. But theory is just theory. I'm offering you a chance to actually make a difference. Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside him. The warm connection he'd felt with Alexander just moments before began to cool, replaced by a growing sense of being diminished, categorized, reduced to a single skill set. So you see me as just a car whisperer? Marcus asked, his voice carefully controlled. Alexander paused, seeming to sense the change in Marcus's tone. I see you as extraordinarily talented in a very specific area. And nothing else? Marcus, I'm not sure what you're getting at. I'm offering you an incredible opportunity. Marcus stood up slowly. His grandfather's tools still spread across the chronodrives, hood-like artifacts from a different world. Mr. Chun, can I ask you something? Of course. When you decided to test drive the chronodrive yourself, when you disguised yourself as a regular person, what were you hoping to learn? Alexander frowned, confused by the direction of the conversation. I wanted to understand how the car performed in real-world conditions. But why disguise yourself? Why not just hire someone to test it? Because I wanted an authentic experience. I wanted to see how it handled unexpected situations without the interference of people treating me differently because of who I am. Marcus nodded slowly. So you understand the value of being seen for who you really are, not just what people expect you to be. Yes, but what does that have to do with everything? Marcus interrupted, his voice gaining strength. You're doing exactly what you were trying to avoid. You're not seeing Marcus Washington, the person. You're seeing Marcus, the car fixer, the useful tool who can solve your automotive problems. Alexander's expression shifted to irritation. That's not fair. I'm offering you a life-changing opportunity. You're offering me a job, Marcus corrected. A very well-paying job doing exactly what you need me to do, in exactly the way you need me to do it. But you're asking me to abandon everything else that makes me who I am. Philosophy doesn't make you who you are, Alexander said, his voice rising slightly. Your talent with automotive technology makes you who you are. The words hit Marcus like a slap. He gathered his grandfather's tools slowly, methodically, placing each one back in its designated spot in the worn leather case. The chronodrive's dashboard lights seemed to dim in response to the tension in the air. You know what's funny? Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. 3 hours ago, I was ready to sacrifice everything to help a stranger. I missed the most important exam of my life because I thought helping you was more important than my own future. And I'm trying to give you a better future, Alexander protested. No, Marcus said firmly. You're trying to give me your version of a better future. You're trying to take a complex human being and reduce him to the parts that are useful to you. Alexander's face flushed with frustration. Marcus, you're being emotional. This is business. Business, Marcus repeated, the word tasting bitter. Right? Because the moment money enters the equation, everything else becomes irrelevant. I'm trying to help you escape poverty, Alexander said, his voice taking on a hard edge. I'm trying to give you opportunities you could never create for yourself. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus felt something break inside him. Not just disappointment, but a deep, crushing recognition of a pattern he'd experienced his entire life. People saw his circumstances before they saw him, saw his potential usefulness before they saw his humanity. There it is, Marcus said softly. The real Alexander Chin. The man who sees a poor black kid and thinks he knows exactly what that kid needs. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said, Marcus replied, closing the laptop with deliberate care. You looked at me and saw someone who needed rescuing. Someone who should be grateful for whatever scraps of opportunity you were willing to throw my way. Alexander's expression shifted between anger and confusion. I'm offering you $150,000 a year. That's not scraps. Money is an opportunity, Marcus said, unplugging the diagnostic equipment from the chronodrive's port. Opportunity is being seen for all of who you are, not just the parts that someone else finds useful. So you're going to turn down the chance of a lifetime because of pride? Marcus looked at Alexander with profound sadness. I'm going to turn down the chance to disappear into someone else's vision of who I should be. The chronodrive's engine, which had been humming contentedly just minutes before, began to emit a subtle discordant note. Marcus noticed it immediately, but Alexander seemed oblivious to the change. Fine, Alexander said, his voice cold. Walk away. Go back to your studio apartment and your philosophy books. Keep telling yourself that theory matters more than reality. Marcus shouldered his grandfather's tool case, the weight of it familiar and comforting. You know what Papa Joe used to say about engines that made noise like that? What? He said they were trying to tell you something important, but most people were too busy talking to listen. Marcus walked toward the parking garage exit, his footsteps echoing in the concrete space. Behind him, he could hear the chronodrive's engine growing more agitated, the harmonious purr he'd created dissolving into mechanical discord. Marcus, Alexander called after him. You're making a huge mistake. Marcus paused at the threshold between the garage and the street, where the morning sun was beginning to burn through the last of the storm clouds. He turned back to look at Alexander, who stood beside the increasingly troubled chronodrive, looking simultaneously furious and lost. Maybe, Marcus said quietly, but it's my mistake to make. And with that, he walked out into the morning light, leaving behind the most lucrative opportunity he'd ever been offered, and the most devastating disappointment he'd ever experienced. The chronodrive's engine sputtered and died, leaving Alexander alone in the silence of the parking garage, surrounded by the echoes of words that couldn't be taken back and the growing realization that he'd just lost something infinitely more valuable than money. What would you do if someone offered you everything you thought you wanted, but at the cost of everything you truly are? Sometimes the hardest choice is walking away from what looks like success. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Miles away, Marcus walked through the streets of Oakland, his grandfather's tools heavy on his shoulder and his heart heavier still, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life or taken the first step toward defining success on his own terms. Marcus walked through the rain-slicked streets of Oakland, his grandfather's tool case growing heavier with each step. The morning sun struggled to break through the departing storm clouds, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the confusion in his heart. His phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket, probably Professor Williams wondering where he was, or maybe his study group asking about the exam he'd never taken. He ignored it all. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on him like the humid air after the storm. $150,000. A job at one of the most innovative companies in the world. A scholarship in Papa Joe's name. Everything he'd ever dreamed of, wrapped up in a package that felt like a golden cage. Marcus found himself standing outside the East Oakland Public Library, a place he'd spent countless hours researching automotive technology when he couldn't afford the latest magazines. The building looked different in the morning light, smaller, more worn than he remembered. Through the windows, he could see the familiar rows of computers where he'd watched Formula One races and engineering documentaries, trying to keep his grandfather's passion alive. His phone buzzed again. This time he looked. Marcus, where are you? The exam started 20 minutes ago. I'm holding the door open as long as I can. Professor Williams. Marcus stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. What would he say? That he'd been offered the job of a lifetime but walked away because the billionaire couldn't see him as more than a useful tool? That he'd sacrificed everything for a stranger who turned out to be exactly the kind of person Papa Joe had warned him about? Men with money think money solves everything, Papa Joe had said during one of their late-night conversations about racing and life. But some problems can't be bought, boy. Some things have to be earned through understanding. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the familiar ache of missing his grandfather's wisdom. What would Papa Joe say about this situation? About walking away from financial security to preserve something as intangible as dignity? Another message appeared on his phone, this one from an unknown number. Marcus, it's Alexander. I think we need to talk. The chronodrive isn't responding to any of our diagnostic tools. Whatever you did, whatever connection you made with her, it's gone. Please call me. Marcus almost laughed at the irony. The car that had brought them together was now the thing that proved how far apart they really were. He'd helped the chronodrive find her voice, and now she was using it to express exactly what Marcus felt: the frustration of being misunderstood, the pain of being reduced to a single function. He walked into the library, nodding to Mrs. Rodriguez at the front desk, who'd watched him grow up among these books. The familiar smell of old paper and cleaning solution wrapped around him like a comfort blanket. He made his way to the computer section, where a few early morning patrons were already settling in for their daily routines. Marcus sat at his usual computer station number 7, the one with the slightly sticky spacebar, and stared at the blank screen. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to search for. Automotive technology? Philosophy journals? Job applications? Instead, he found himself typing his grandfather's name into the search engine. Joseph Washington, Formula 1 Racing Accident 1998. The results loaded slowly, bringing up articles he'd read dozens of times before. But today, one headline caught his attention that he'd somehow missed before: Crash victim Washington refuses settlement, chooses teaching over litigation. Marcus clicked the link, his heart racing. The article was from a small racing magazine, dated 3 months after Papa Joe's accident. Formula 1 driver Joseph Washington, whose promising career was ended by a mechanical failure at Laguna Seca Raceway, has declined a multi-million-dollar settlement offer from the race organization. "Money can't give me back my legs," Washington said in an exclusive interview. "But I can give young people something more valuable: the knowledge to prevent what happened to me from happening to others." Washington plans to use his settlement money to establish a community automotive program in East Oakland, teaching underprivileged youth about car mechanics and racing technology. Marcus felt tears gathering in his eyes. He'd never known about the settlement, never known that Papa Joe had chosen teaching over money. His grandfather had walked away from millions of dollars to preserve something more valuable: the chance to pass on knowledge and dignity to the next generation. His phone rang. Alexander's name appeared on the screen. Marcus hesitated, then answered. "Hello." "Marcus, thank God. Listen, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I realize I may have come across as insensitive." "May have." Alexander's voice was strained, tired. "The chronodrive has been acting erratically ever since you left. My entire engineering team is baffled. She's responding to voice commands, but only to reject them. It's like she's angry." Despite everything, Marcus felt a smile tugging at his lips. "She's not angry. She's disappointed." "Disappointed? You taught her to trust human connection. Then you immediately tried to reduce that connection to a business transaction." "She's reflecting what she observed." There was a long pause. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay. Am I really the kind of person who only sees people as tools?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think you're the kind of person who's been successful for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to be seen as only one thing. You've forgotten that other people have complex inner lives that don't revolve around what they can do for you." Another pause. "My ex-wife used to say something similar." "What did she say?" "That I collected people like I collected technology, for what they could contribute to my vision, not for who they were as complete human beings." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. "And what did you say to that?" "I said she was being emotional and impractical." Alexander's voice was barely above a whisper. "I lost her too." The vulnerability in Alexander's voice was unexpected, raw. Marcus found himself leaning forward, his anger softening into something more complex. "Alexander, can I ask you something?" "Yes." "What made you want to become an engineer in the first place?" "I wanted to solve problems that seemed impossible. I wanted to create connections between things that had never been connected before. And now," Now I spend most of my time in board meetings, discussing profit margins and market share. I haven't actually built anything with my own hands in years." Marcus nodded, understanding flooding through him. "You miss the work." "I miss the wonder," Alexander corrected. "I miss the feeling of discovery, of making something work that shouldn't work. Like what the chronodrive felt when she first understood her own systems?" "Exactly like that." Marcus made a decision. "Alexander, I want to make you an offer." "What?" "I'll come back and help you with the chronodrive, but on my terms." "Name them." "First, I finish my philosophy degree. The thesis I'm writing about opportunity and systemic barriers, it matters. It's part of who I am." "Agreed." "Second, we establish the Papa Joe Washington Fellowship, but not just for automotive technology. For any student who shows exceptional talent in bridging different fields, philosophy and engineering, art and technology, music and mathematics." "That's actually brilliant." "Third, I don't work for Chronotech. I work with Chronotech as an independent consultant. I keep my autonomy, my identity, my right to say no." Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "And in return?" "In return, I help you remember what it feels like to create something impossible. I help you reconnect with the wonder you've lost." "What about the salary?" Marcus smiled. "Pay me what you think the work is worth when you think it's worth it. But understand that my value isn't measured in dollars." "Marcus, this is highly irregular. My board would never approve such an arrangement." "Then we don't tell your board. We just do the work and let the results speak for themselves." Another long pause. "You realize this could fail completely?" "Everything worth doing risks failure," Marcus replied. "Papa Joe taught me that." "And if it succeeds? Then maybe we'll have created something that's never existed before. A partnership between two people who see each other as complete human beings, not just useful tools." Alexander's laughter was surprised, genuine. "You know what's funny? That's exactly what I was trying to achieve with the chronodrive. A partnership between human and machine that went beyond simple functionality." "Then let's go make it happen." As Marcus stood to leave the library, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, making exactly the choice his grandfather would have made. He was choosing dignity over dollars, partnership over employment, and the long, uncertain path of authentic connection over the quick reward of being useful to someone else's vision. For the first time since walking out of that parking garage, Marcus felt like he could breathe freely. The real work was just beginning. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the gleaming innovation lab of Chronotech. But this wasn't the sterile corporate environment he'd initially feared. The space buzzed with an energy he recognized from his grandfather's old garage. The electric atmosphere of creation, of minds working together towards something extraordinary. The chronodrive prototype sat in the center of the lab, her midnight blue surface now adorned with small modifications that told the story of months of collaboration. Handwritten notes in both Marcus's neat script and Alexander's hurried scrawl were taped to her dashboard, a visual reminder that the best innovations came from human connection, not corporate hierarchy. "Good morning, beautiful," Marcus said softly, running his hand along the car's sleek hood. The chronodrive's interior lights pulsed in response, a gentle blue glow that had become her way of saying hello. "She's excited about today," Alexander said, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. Gone were the expensive suits and carefully maintained distance. These days, Alexander wore jeans and old t-shirts, his hands often stained with engine grease and his hair slightly disheveled from hours spent bent over machinery. "Are you?" Marcus asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. Alexander grinned, and for a moment, Marcus could see the young engineer he'd once been, the one who'd built his first computer in a garage and dreamed of changing the world. Terrified and thrilled, the perfect combination. Today marked the public debut of the chronodrive, but more importantly, it marked the unveiling of the Papa Joe Washington Fellowship Program. The first cohort of 12 students, young people from backgrounds like Marcus's who showed exceptional ability to bridge different fields, would be presenting their projects alongside the car. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Professor Williams. Thesis defense went perfectly. Dr. Marcus Washington has a nice ring to it. Papa Joe would be proud. Marcus smiled, touching the small photo of his grandfather that now hung on a chain around his neck. His thesis, The Ethics of Opportunity, When Potential Meets Partnership, had become more than an academic exercise. It had become a blueprint for how the fellowship program operated. "Are you ready for the reporters?" Alexander asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "I've been ready my whole life," Marcus replied. "The question is, are you ready to share credit for the first time in your career?" Alexander laughed, a sound that had become much more frequent over the past months. "You know what? I am." It turns out being right isn't nearly as satisfying as being part of something bigger than yourself. The transformation in Alexander had been remarkable to witness. The disconnected billionaire who'd seen people as tools had gradually rediscovered his humanity through their partnership. He'd started spending time in the communities where the fellowship students lived, not as a charity case study, but as someone genuinely interested in understanding different perspectives. 5 minutes until the presentation, called Jennifer, Alexander's assistant, who'd initially been skeptical of the unconventional arrangement but had become one of its strongest supporters. Marcus nodded, then walked over to where the fellowship students were making final adjustments to their displays. There was Priya, a 17-year-old from Fremont who'd combined her knowledge of classical music with automotive acoustics to create a revolutionary sound dampening system. Kevin, a 19-year-old from Stockton who'd applied his street art techniques to develop new methods for applying protective coatings to vehicle surfaces. Each student represented what Marcus had always known but society had forgotten: that innovation came from unexpected places, that brilliance couldn't be contained by economic circumstances or traditional educational paths. "Remember," Marcus told them, "you're not here to prove you deserve to be here. You're here to show the world what's possible when potential meets opportunity." The presentation hall filled with reporters, investors, and industry executives. Marcus caught sight of Mrs. Chun from the newsstand, wearing her best dress and beaming with pride. Professor Williams sat in the front row, his eyes already misty with emotion. Alexander took the stage first, but his opening words were nothing like the corporate presentations he'd given for years. "6 months ago, I was a man who'd forgotten why I became an engineer," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "I'd become so focused on the business of innovation that I'd lost sight of the wonder of creation. Then I met someone who changed everything." He gestured to Marcus, who joined him on stage. "This is Dr. Marcus Washington, and before you ask, yes, he's a philosopher, not an engineer. But he's also the person who taught me that the most important technology isn't what we build, it's how we connect with each other." Marcus stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment. "My grandfather always said that the best mechanics don't just fix cars. They listen to what the car is trying to tell them. The Chronodrive project taught us that the same principle applies to human relationships." The Chronodrive was wheeled onto the stage, her systems active and responsive. Marcus placed his hand on her hood, and she responded with a gentle pulse of light that rippled across her surface. "What you're seeing isn't just advanced technology," Alexander continued. "It's the result of partnership between human and machine, between different ways of thinking, between people who might never have met under normal circumstances." The demonstration that followed was unlike anything the automotive industry had seen. The chronodrive didn't just perform. She communicated. Her systems adapted not just to road conditions but to the emotional state of her driver, creating a truly symbiotic relationship between human and machine. But the real magic happened when the fellowship students presented their projects. One by one, they showed how combining their unique perspectives with cutting-edge technology could solve problems that had stumped traditional engineers for years. As the formal presentation concluded and the reception began, Marcus found himself surrounded by reporters and executives, all eager to understand how a philosophy student had become central to such a revolutionary project. Dr. Washington called a reporter from Automotive News. "How do you respond to critics who say you're not qualified to work on such advanced technology?" Marcus smiled, thinking of his grandfather's words about proving yourself through action rather than credentials. "I'd say that qualification isn't about what school you went to or what your degree says. It's about whether you can solve the problem in front of you with creativity, compassion, and skill." "And what's next for the Papa Joe Washington Fellowship?" asked another reporter. "We're expanding," Alexander answered, joining the conversation. "We're looking for young people who think differently, who see connections that others miss. We're not just training engineers. We're cultivating innovators who understand that the best solutions come from bringing together diverse perspectives." Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the equipment had been packed away, Marcus and Alexander stood alone in the lab with the chronodrive. The car's systems hummed quietly, her lights pulsing in the gentle rhythm that had become familiar to both men. "She's happy," Marcus observed. "She should be," Alexander replied. "She's exactly what she was designed to be, a bridge between human creativity and technological possibility." Marcus nodded, running his hand along the car's surface one more time. "Papa Joe would have loved this. Not just the technology, but the idea that we proved innovation comes from connection, not isolation." "Speaking of connection," Alexander said, "I have something for you." He handed Marcus a small wrapped package. Inside was a vintage racing photo Papa Joe in his prime, standing beside his Formula One car, young and full of dreams. "I found this in the racing archives," Alexander explained. "I thought it should come home." Marcus felt tears gathering in his eyes. "How did you?" "I've been learning to pay attention to what matters to people," Alexander said simply. "It's amazing what you notice when you stop seeing people as tools and start seeing them as complete human beings." As they prepared to leave the lab, Marcus's phone buzzed with notifications. The story of the chronodrive and the Papa Joe Washington Fellowship was already spreading across social media, with the hashtag unexpected brilliance trending worldwide. But the message that mattered most was from Kevin, one of the fellowship students. "Dr. Washington, my little sister says she wants to be an engineer now. Thank you for showing us that our dreams aren't too big." Marcus smiled, thinking of all the young people who would now see possibility where they'd once seen only barriers. The headlines that broke the internet weren't just about a car or a breakthrough in technology. They were about the radical idea that brilliance could come from anywhere, and that the most powerful innovations happened when people chose connection over convenience. As they walked out into the California evening, Marcus felt his grandfather's presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. He'd kept the promise he'd made that stormy April morning. He'd stayed true to who he was while finding a way to honor everything Papa Joe had taught him. The poor philosophy student who'd missed his final exam to help a stranger had become Dr. Marcus Washington, innovator, educator, and proof that sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. And in the quiet hum of the chronodrive systems, in the laughter of fellowship students discovering their potential, in the transformation of a billionaire who'd remembered how to wonder, Papa Joe's legacy lived on, not in the tools he'd left behind, but in the bridge he'd helped his grandson build between dreams and reality. The storm had passed, but the connections it had created would last a lifetime. What unexpected encounter has changed your life? Sometimes the most powerful transformations come from the moments when we choose to help rather than hurry past. Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and share this video with someone who needs to hear that their dreams aren't too big. They're just waiting for the right moment to shine. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.